That is both profoundly hilarious and also really interestingly insightful when you unpack that, right? Because these patients are sending this to their doctor. They want to learn about their health. They're asking their doctor, like, am I okay? And if we can provide something that gives people that peace of mind from the comfort of home, that's worthwhile.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Benary. Today I'm joined by Scott Hickle, co-founder and CEO of Throne. In this episode, we discuss Throne's mission to bring cancer detection into the bathroom. Scott shares how his team is building a smart toilet that analyzes waste, providing effortless, real-time data to improve digestive health and diagnostics. Plus, we talk about launching a hardware company, earning consumer trust, and the third wave of health tracking. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is presented by EGYM. EGYM's smart fitness ecosystem is transforming healthcare through exercise. Combining strength equipment with AI-powered software and corporate wellness platform WellPass, it's leading the shift to proactive, preventative health. Learn more about EGYM's intelligent workout solutions at egym.com. Hi, Scott. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Excited to get into it. Let's kick things off. Why don't you tell us about yourself and Throne, and then we'll get into all the details.
Absolutely. I'm Scott, co-founder and CEO of Throne. We're building the first device to track gut health and hydration from your toilet. We joke it's like Whoop for your poop or Aura for your flora or the Shipbit, but effectively it's a wearable for your toilet. Our mission is to make gut health and hydration tracking as effortless as sleep and exercise tracking.
Yeah, this is, I love how just like punny and chill you guys are about it. Obviously the humor kind of helps with something that's like, it's personal and kind of stigmatized in a way that's the broader like diagnostics health tracking is not. So how much of a barrier was that even in thinking like, hey, this makes a ton of sense. Like when you go to the doctor, they're doing urine analysis. If you get one of these kits in the mail, even me, I'm like stigmatized saying it, put your poop like in a box and mail it back to them. Like now you're like, oh, let's just do it at home. Like how was that received?
There's a lot to unpack here. The truth is, one of my co-founders and I met back in 2021, and he pitched me the idea literally the first day we ever met. We were sitting around a poker table. He pitched this idea of a smart toilet. And we joked about the idea for 2 years before we took it seriously, right? And so, like, there's something so intrinsically funny and just unserious about poop that it took a while for us to, like, peel back the layers of puns. Like, we started talking about Throne in 2021. We didn't think about it as a business idea for real until 2023. And so it was finally in 2023 that we peeled back these layers of puns and saw, like, wait, buried underneath all of this, there's a gem of like a genuine health innovation here. And to your point, people hate anything that involves collecting samples from the toilet, right? So there's like stool collection kits that you can send off to measure your microbiome and inflammatory markers. There's urinalysis kits where you can, take a dipstick and put it. People hate those things, like, totally understandably. And so it wasn't until, much later, after talking about this for 2 years, is like this kind of theoretical far away, like, this feels like an inevitable future, but like, certainly we're not the ones to build this. We called my mom, she's a geriatrician, and asked her, like, hey, mom, is there any medical utility to looking at people's waste? And she was the first one to be like, yeah, like this is not a joke. That, like, in the field of geriatrics, that's well known that, like, all our patients talk about is three things: their kids, their meds, and their poop. Like, as you age, your body starts to behave differently. Your digestive system slows down. Your gut motility slows down. You are retired more often than not, and you have a lot more awareness of these changes in your body, and it dominates your thought. And beyond that, she was like, I stopped giving my phone number to my patients years ago because they would send me so many pictures of their poop. And that was the first thing that I had the same reaction, right? Like, that is both profoundly hilarious and also really interestingly insightful when you unpack that, right? Because these patients are sending this to their doctor. They want to learn about their health. And my mom's answer is, please don't do that again. But they have a real need, right? They're asking their doctor, like, am I okay? And if we can provide something that gives people that peace of mind from the comfort of home, that's worthwhile. That was the first thing that, really incentivized us to look into, is there a way to provide some at-home real-time analysis that is hands-free.
Even if you start to go through this checklist of biomarkers that are impactful to look at, as you mentioned, like urine, stool, and then, heart rate and steps and VO2 max and all these things. And so we have wearables that are starting to check these other boxes, and people want to get, it feels like there's a new blood testing company getting launched almost every day, right? That they'll get your panels and you go to a LabCorp or wherever. But what about like urine and stool? It's like that feels way more accessible, right? Even when you start to go down the list, and something that, to your point, you're able to solve for with technology. Like, what were the barriers that such that to this point we don't have these just like in our homes, or talking about equipping a dumb toilet, so to speak, with
Yeah.
this, but also a smart toilet that maybe comes with it already built in?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a lot of barriers to this, right? The first is like there's already, to your point, there's a lot of blood testing startups being launched that are effectively wrappers for Quest or LabCorp, right? There's a lot of that happening in the gut health world as well, where there's these microbiome testing companies that will send it off to a lab and then run their proprietary AI analysis on top of that. Similar, there are companies that have tried to package like urinalysis dipsticks as AI tools. And you take a picture of the dipstick and then it'll read out. The fundamental challenge is just anything involving human waste. The user experience has to be very elegant, because the reality is, like, you think about, like, what is the comparison, right? The comparison is Whoop, Aura, Garmin, Apple Watch. It's these things that are, even, CGMs are effectively effortless, right? The application's not pleasant, but it's much lower friction than like collecting a cup of your urine or a scoop of your poop and putting it in a box and sending it off to a lab. So the user experience has been the biggest friction piece. There's companies that have tried to do this and failed because they didn't hold themselves to the same standards of user experience that other health trackers have already educated the market to expect.
It's very easy to fall into this medical device, or even like bathroom, right? It feels like it's just a thing in a bathroom, or it feels very medicalized, like a medical device that you might encounter in like a hospital. Whereas what people who are interested in these biomarkers and insights, who are actively think about like basically your core user, right? Or at least early adopters are going to be people who are like, oh, I want to understand what's going on. And yeah, to your point, if you're not presenting them with like some type of in-app experience, that it's pretty seamless, that there's some type of recommendation or some type of insight, like what you do with it, it is very off-putting for a number of reasons.
You asked about, like, why isn't this integrated in a toilet, and, like, there's the medical device pitfall. Like, there's something about like waste-based health monitoring that is a very confusing category, because, like, is this a medical device, right? Like, there's companies that have tried to do this, but their go-to-market has been focused on clinical settings, right? Like selling into nursing homes and assisted living facilities. There's, obviously the medical use case, which is, collecting stool samples to look for inflammatory markers for people with like inflammatory bowel disease or looking for parasites. There's nobody that has done this in a consumer health way yet, right? Which is, I want to build Whoop for your poop. And like that is a different pitch that requires careful attention to detail. Because like even building it into a toilet, everyone says like, why don't you partner with all the big toilet companies? But like, you know, like American Standard and Kohler are porcelain manufacturers. That's their expertise. It's not health tracking. It's not electronics manufacturing. And so it's everyone expects the big players to be looking at this. Toto, they've looked into it, but nobody's taken anything to market. And I think there's a reason. It's not their area of expertise. And then, you look at like the big fitness trackers, like they've stayed away from this for like obvious reasons, which is like it's not theirs either.
Quickly kind of going back and just bridging this gap between, you said, hey, there's an idea kind of originating from a poker game and we joked about it from a couple years, to now are we a medical device, or are we detecting illness, and how do we help people, like building this technology, figuring out like actually how to monitor anything, the solution between, like right now you're talking very much like the expert on gut health and also hardware and also toilets. Like, I'm sure that wasn't all the case in, 2020. I think you said 2021 when you first started thinking about this. So like, when do you dive down that rabbit hole of, oh yeah, like I think there's something here. Here's how I start educating myself. And like, yeah, this is the like all in moment where I'm like, we can make this into a company.
So it was after that first conversation with my mom that my co-founder Tim and I looked at each other. We're like, wait a second, like people are sending pictures of poop to the doctor. They want to learn about this. Like there was a lot of talk at that time about how radiology was going to be one of the first medical professions to be augmented by AI, if not replaced by AI, because computer vision doesn't have a bad day where it's, hungover or too sleepy and misses a spot on an x-ray. And we were like, well, if you took that same principle and put it in the toilet, like what could you learn from looking at people's waste? So that then we just kind of started a first principles analysis of like what are the different biomarkers you can learn from looking at people's waste, right? You can learn stool frequency, stool consistency on the Bristol stool scale, which is like the medical terminology for like hard, healthy, loose liquid. You can learn how much someone's straining by looking at the distribution of evacuation events, right? So if someone is sitting there for 5 seconds, that's much healthier than 5 minutes before you have your first movement. You can learn how hydrated someone is. And like, there's a ton of hydration trackers on the market today, but they're mostly sweat based. And that's great for endurance athletes. That's less good for your grandpa. You can measure urinary flow rate, which is like the number one metric for prostate health. You can look for stool color, which can teach you about your overall gut health. Like, if it's clay colored, that means you have liver issues. You can look at stool volume. You can measure digestive transit time, which is like how long it takes something to process end to end. And once you have that, then you can start doing really accurate correlations of your diet and your digestive patterns and understand like sensitivities and triggers and intolerances in a way that like henceforth hasn't been done yet. There's some really cool cutting edge research showing that photos of stool can tell you how inflamed someone's colon is, which is, you think about that's like 1,000x improvement in user experience for people who have inflammatory bowel disease, right? Because instead of collecting a sample of stool, sending it off to a lab, waiting for like 2 to 4 weeks to get your results back, you could have something in theory, in real time every time you go without ever having to touch it, without having to think about it. It just gets sent to your phone 2 minutes later. Like, that's very much on the roadmap for us. And so we realized like, whoa, there's like all these different biomarkers. And then we started asking ourselves, who are the patient populations who benefit the most from this? And then we realized like, wow, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, there's roughly 3 million Americans. There's another, 25 to 30 million Americans with irritable bowel syndrome. There are another roughly 38 million Americans with, what is it, benign prostatic hyperplasia. That's non-cancerous enlargement of the prostate that affects 50% of men by age 50 and 80% of men by age 70. So like it's kind of coming for all of us, just a matter of when. They have chronic kidney disease, recurrent kidney stone formers. And then you start having conditions that are not strictly gut health conditions like polycystic ovarian or endometriosis, who often have gut health symptoms, like bloating. And we're like, wow, like, there are tens of millions of Americans who experience chronic conditions whose primary manifestations are gut health and urinary symptoms, who have no way of tracking this on a daily basis. But every time they go in to see their urologist or their gastroenterologist, they ask them, have you been peeing or how have you been pooping? And like, it's just like, I don't know, I think I had a bad bout for about 4 days, 3 months ago. Like, that's useless, as opposed to like being able to give you, here is the ground truth information that then you can talk about with your care team or start to just run experiments on yourselves, right? Like, one of the things I love so much about health trackers is being able to see like in real time, like, whoa, like when I drink, it really does materially impact my gut or my sleep and my recovery.
Like hearing you go through the list of just potential impact, symptoms, diseases, like the areas where this information could have like a needle moving, like significant difference. And previously we were just making the comparison to wearables and health trackers. It's like, as helpful as they are, we're not talking about potentially, you know, knowing signs of prostate cancer from like a what name the wearable device. So potentially a significant delta between what's people accept as like quote unquote health tracking and where it can potentially be when we're looking at, stool and urine and things like that on a every movement basis. in terms of like the actual product now, how you see that evolving, the technology that's in there, like how is it that we are able to make that work at this point, and what is possible in terms of what we're able to detect, diagnose, and potentially see for people?
Yeah, great question. So we're starting as a what was called a general wellness device as it's regulated by the FDA. So we're not making medical diagnoses. We are just tracking health indicators and then showing you that data so that you can start to again run experiments on yourself or have informed conversations with your care team. Long term, to your point, the thing I'm so excited about is the life-saving opportunity here, particularly as it comes to early cancer diagnosis. So changes in urinary flow rate can indicate early signs of prostate cancer. Trace amounts of blood in your urine can be an early indicator of bladder cancer. And then, kind of the big one is what's called fecal occult blood, is the earliest indicator of colon cancer or colorectal cancer. And that is the second deadliest cancer in the country behind lung cancer. And it is rapidly growing, right? Like 5% of the country today is expected to get colon cancer at some point in their lives. 1 in 3 people diagnosed with colon cancer die from it. 100% because we catch it too late. If you catch colon cancer early, it's one of the easiest cancers to cure, right? You go in, 45-minute outpatient procedure, get a colonoscopy, snip it out, you're good, right? You can like make it to your family function that evening. If you catch it too late, once it's metastasized, you're looking at like basically a 15% chance of being alive in 5 years. We are not launching a cancer detecting device when we launch in January, but every one of those devices we sell funds the development of the cancer device. And that's, where we would like to be 3 to 5 years from now, is launching the version of this device that not only gets you all these health and wellness benefits, but is also looking for trace amounts of blood and patterns of blood to be able to raise a red flag and say, even if we're not saying you have colon cancer, right? There's like 15 things that can cause blood in your stool, fissures, fistulas, ulcers, like hemorrhoids. But we just need to be able to say, hey, there's a pattern of blood in your stool. You should talk to a gastroenterologist about this. And if you show your GI that data, 9 times out of 10, they're going to ask you, hey, let's get you a colonoscopy just to be safe. And if you catch something that, a polyp or a carcinoma before it becomes a malignant tumor, like there will come a day where someone can say in good faith, my toilet saved my life. And that's amazing.
Getting to this point and then looking at not this cancer detection device even, but even, kind of January, kind of full scale launch, you recently raised a round of funding, have been obviously working on this idea, bringing it to life. Does that funding unlock? And then how do you think about roadmap and what it's going to take to get to where you want to be, call it next year?
Yeah, great question. So the funding unlocks our right to get through mass production. So mass production is incredibly expensive. You have to carve tooling and injection molds and just designing a design for manufactured device and getting all the packaging done. Like there's just so many parts that go into making a consumer hardware device that is of the same caliber as Apple or Android, right? Like that is what consumers expect, is quality and thought and intentionality behind every decision. And so that's what the funding has unlocked for us, is we can now get through launch and 6 months after launch, and we'll be alive. And then on the roadmap, so we have all of the basic features for tracking gut health, urinary function, and hydration. And then the roadmap is really fleshing more of those out and taking certain indications through FDA. One of the cool things is, like Apple Watch launched as a health and wellness device, but then post facto was able to say we are now FDA cleared to look for arrhythmia. And there are certain indications that are fairly low hanging fruit for us that we can, take through FDA and then be able to push an update to the app and say, okay, now we're a medical device for this specific thing. And that's something that I'm incredibly excited about, because that opens up opportunities not to just go direct to consumer, but also to use this in clinical settings or in aging in place environments where it really is important to monitor those patients on a daily basis and catch things before they become clinically symptomatic.
This episode of the Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM makes some of the most innovative strength training machines on the market, but that's only one part of their integrated ecosystem. With connected fitness equipment, AI-powered gym software, and a comprehensive corporate wellness offering, it's forging the future of preventative health. Partnering with companies worldwide, EGYM's WellPass program improves employee health by expanding access to premier fitness and health facilities. Upgrading gym floors, EGYM equips every operator with smart equipment and AI tools to create hyper-personalized training plans for every exerciser. Putting it all together, they're transforming healthcare through exercise. Experience the power of EGYM's ecosystem at egym.com. This production and building the hardware itself, there's kind of the software at the same time that I'm sure is equally as intense and complicated to develop. And much like you're talking about, hey, we want to over time reach these different benchmarks, continuing to evolve to enable that it can be used for those purposes. How is that kind of taking shape? And obviously you're leveraging all types of things, AI, I'm sure, and integrating that into the process. So yeah, making sure that that is also in the place right where you need it to be, but also that consumers expect as it gets to market.
Totally. I mean, we have a half dozen different AI models that power all of the analysis, right? Taking just raw data, that's, images of your stool and extracting health insights out of that is a, whole complicated kind of data processing pipeline. And we put a lot of emphasis on the models that need to be accurate to the naked eye, right? Like if you turn around and you see like, well, this said that was a healthy bowel movement, but like it's clearly not, you lose trust in the product. So like those models have to be incredibly like 99% accurate, right? Like same thing with hydration. If it says you're incredibly well hydrated and you turn around and it's, the color of liquid Gatorade, like maybe not. So those are incredibly important. Then there's things like urinary flow rate that like, that's an acoustic model. So we're using audio to measure urinary flow rate. And that's one that like most people aren't going to have, the same ability to fact check. Now, ironically, that's one of the easiest ones we can test. And we're, very, very accurate at that. But a lot of our effort right now before launch is just making sure all of our models are incredibly accurate. And then kind of long term, one of the things I'm most excited about is once we have this out in the wild and we have, thousands of devices and thousands of, tens of thousands of data points coming in every single day, I think there's genuine opportunity to improve the standard operating procedure and kind of the medical literature and just drive an understanding of the human body, right? Like, for example, for recurrent kidney stone formers, is it enough we all know that like hydration is the thing that prevents kidney stone formation, but is it enough for someone who is prone to kidney stones to drink a lot of water 1 day a week? Is that enough to flush out your kidneys? Or is that something you need? Is it 5 days a week? Like, we don't know the answers to that because right now no one's measuring hydration on a daily basis in that way. Similarly, like, the Bristol stool scale is, this medical classification of, hard, healthy, loose, liquid. And it's 1 through 7, right? We're like 1 and 2 are constipated, 3 and 4 are healthy, 5 is loose, 6 and 7 are liquid. Like there's almost certainly a better, more granular, more accurate way of assessing stool quality. And like the rubric for the Bristol stool scale is like this watercolored thing that everybody with a GI issue or a gastroenterologist has seen, but like people confuse them all the time. And like, I think there's definitely ways that we can use computer vision and AI and mountains of data to just better describe gut issues.
It's crazy as you're talking about this. And this because it was a little bit of actually a hiccup in getting this scheduled, is that I recently broke my foot and then had an issue with that. And I promise this relates to what you're saying, because I basically go in and they give me like a little piece of paper with like different levels of smiley faces on it, like somebody who's like very, very sad and somebody who's very happy. And that's how I'm supposed to tell them how I'm managing my pain. And then maybe does that warrant me getting a physical examination? And then maybe then they escalate that to me actually getting an x-ray and so on and so forth, because initially they didn't believe me, right? And meanwhile, I just stood up and took a photo looking down at my feet and uploaded it to ChatGPT and said, you have a broken fifth metatarsal. This is this, blah, 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 just because how it was swollen, just because what it looked like in relationship to the other one. And yet there, your reaction is the same reaction I had, which is like, holy hell, like nothing. I did, it wasn't even discolored at that point. And thinking about what's possible relative to what you're met with in the typical doctor's visit, it just automatically flashes you forward to this place of like walking into the bathroom, your mirror looking at your face, telling that something's off, right? You just going to the bathroom and getting a reading back and all that getting corrected kind of in real time. That seems super futuristic and maybe even, I don't know, sci-fi dystopian to some people, but the fact that like the gap between where we are now in 2025 and using a paper checklist, or in this case, like a drawing picture of stool to know whether or not you're unwell, like it's crazy.
Yeah, I totally agree, and, like, yes, I talked to a gastroenterologist literally yesterday who was, like, stoked about what we're building because he was telling me several times a week, he'll ask a patient, "Please look at this watercolor chart and tell me, what your bowel movements look like." And one that's often confused is Bristol 1 versus Bristol 5. Bristol 1 is like, deer pellets, and Bristol 5 is like soft, small, jagged edges, but people get those mixed up. And he was like, that's actually problematic in my practice because if you are having consistent Bristol 5s, I might recommend a colonoscopy. Whereas if you're having Bristol 1s, I just tell you eat more fiber. And when people are eyeballing it, and even worse, right? They're like guessing because they're not actually turning around and taking a look. Like you could end up recommending a general anesthetic procedure that they didn't need.
Another piece of this is also just like not just customer acquisition, but education. Like, how are you getting the word out? What, we talked about kind of like having fun with it, having humor, the puns, but also this is serious. You do want it to resonate with people and basically inform them not only what you're trying to do, but the impact you have on their health. And you have this kind of like, I don't want to say runway, but like lead time to do that ahead of like the product actually getting there. What are you thinking about branding, customer acquisition, marketing, and yeah, just really starting and owning this conversation?
Yeah, so we announced our fundraise, and then the fact that we brought on a third co-founder probably a month ago, and that got more attention than we could have anticipated. And not only that, but it got attention in a really interesting way, which is that, like this TechCrunch article came out about a fundraise, and then we also brought on John Capitalupo, who was previously co-founder and CTO of Whoop, onto the team. And like that got people to pay attention to us and take this seriously in a way that a lot just previously hadn't, right? But the fact that the co-founder of Whoop is now working with us to make this a reality, he also has a chronic digestive disease. He gets this and legitimizes this in a way that was impossible to do as like, just Tim and I. It was very helpful. The most interesting thing though is that we got picked up by an Instagram account called Traded VC, and their post got 5,000 likes, but like 15,000 shares. Like that ratio of people sending this in their private DMs to their friends is like I've never seen anything like that in my career. That's just one of the most exciting things in the world is that this is a deeply intimate, deeply personal topic, but everyone has that group of friends that they feel comfortable sharing this with, even if it's like, look how crazy this is, right? But I think more often than not, what's happening is, oh my God, this is for you, right? Like you have those gut health issues we talk about. NPR published this podcast a couple of years ago called Poop Friends, where they talked about, the highest echelon of friendship is the person that you can talk about your bowel movements with no shame. And there's a lot of people with poop friends out there who are sharing Throne with their poop friends. So as we gear up for launch, we're not launching until January. We'll really start working to get the word out there October-ish. But in the meantime, it's just fun to kind of take this momentum that we have now and have conversations with people like you who are reaching out and saying, "Hey, let's talk about this." It's like, I'd love to. This is my life calling. I love doing this. We're not available for sale yet. You can go to our website, sign up for the wait list. You can pre-order a device if you want to lock in that you get one of those devices that comes off the first batch. We deeply appreciate that, but like we're not even asking for that right now. Right now, we just want people to hear about this and reach out to us and share their stories. We hear probably 5 times a week from people just reaching out to us cold right now, just like, oh my God, like, where's this been all my life? I have X, Y, or Z gut health condition. Like, and I try and get on Zoom calls with every single one of them just to hear, what's your story? What is it about this that excites you? Like, what are you hoping to get out of what we're building?
Dude Wipes just raised private equity funding. Dr. Squatch was just acquired by Unilever. Obviously, these are, a different category of brand, but not dissimilar. Well, certainly not Dude Wipes, right? That's very much in the same world. But the point being that they are two brands that, like, at the time, it could be perceived as like them taking big risks, that with so much personality, with so much humor, with so much, just like what is or isn't acceptable to talk about when you talk about like personal care products. Do you think of it that way? Like, there's obviously like this very, like, look, as much as I respect what a lot of the brands have done in the, call it like wearable and health tracking space, it's like you could like switch out some of the ads and it's like, which product was this for? Like, which brand was this for? It's very similar. And then you go down this path of like diagnostics, even if it is like more direct to consumer diagnostics, it's like 100 lab pen, like biomarker pen, like it's the same points, the same things. Like, there's a very clear opportunity to like go the other way with this.
There's so much temptation to go a little bit below brow, tongue in cheek, poop humor, toilet humor route. That said, we also want to be cognizant of the fact that this is a very serious health product that will have life-saving and life-changing outcomes, particularly for people who have chronic GI issues. And like, if you have IBD and you're flaring, like, there are days you just straight up don't leave the house, and like your life is governed by that GI issue, right? And that is something that like isn't a joke. And so the brand we're building, I think I look to like Aura and Function as two brands that have done an amazing job of, and particularly Aura, of being both a serious, approachable health and wellness device, but also like having some tongue-in-cheek humor, right? Their recent campaign, "Give Us the Finger," is a perfect example of like, that is lighthearted, funny, but it doesn't undermine the sincerity of like what they're providing, what value they're providing to their users. Whereas like, I think like, Dude Wipes and Tushy are brands that I think are amazing, like incredible brand market fit for what they do, but we don't want to go quite so tongue in cheek with it ourselves, despite the fact that like and then there's an important distinction to draw between Throne's brand and my personal brand, right?
For
Like,
sure.
I love this stuff and I can talk about, I'm everyone's poop friend, right? Like, so that's one of the most amazing things about building this company is I get on a phone call with someone I've never met and they will share the most intimate details about their health with me that they are often only talking about with their doctor and family or closest friends. And like, I've not had a single one of those calls where we didn't laugh and smile at some poop joke or pun, right? Like, you go to meetings with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, like, there's poop jokes everywhere, right? Like, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has this like, campaign right now called "Let's Go There." Like, everyone makes jokes about this. It's embedded in the culture. And so I'm happy to lean into that myself because it's fun, right? Like, interpersonally, it's just so important. Like, to put a wall between you and I and say, "Hey, I'm not making those jokes," would be like deeply antisocial. But for the brand to do that is probably not the right thing.
It's so smart and it's almost like a trap. Like, it is a trap to like go fully into it, like you said, and just like overcommit almost and be too lowbrow, like, and go the full Dude Wipe and Tushy route. There's also, I think the distinction with your personal brand also is very smart and thoughtful. But then there's this like other area which will be super interesting to see when it does get in the hands of consumers and both influencers. I'm sure there's going to be like some play down that route, like people who have suffered with these things their entire life and now have a device that helps them and have a platform to talk about it. It's like, yeah, to some extent you want the messaging and talking points, but also you want them to be authentic and convey what they're experiencing in like a meaningful, authentic way. It's like, it's going to bring this into the broader mainstream conversation, I think, in such a way that really hasn't happened before. We've started to see with women's health, we've started to see, just average people knowing what glucose monitoring is and knowing what, a spike looks like on an app. And same thing that Aura and Whoop did with recovery scores or sleep scores, like essentially the equivalent of whatever a poop score is, like that being out in the world, like it is like a quote unquote success to some extent.
I mean, we talk about this a lot internally. It's just like we are the third wave health tracker, right? Like first wave was like Fitbit and Apple Watch, and then you had Whoop and Aura, and I guess you could put Garmin in the first wave as well. And now we're at a point where 1 in 6 Americans checks a wearable device every single day. Like Throne was never going to be the first continuous health monitor, but because there's been 2 generations of health wearables before us to educate the market on like why it's actually valuable to track health on a daily basis, that has paved the way for us to exist. And we get to ride this wave of awareness of gut health, right? Like gut health, the conversation around gut health just wasn't what it is today back in 2015.
When you think about these waves of kind of health trackers and devices and brands, and also the kind of alignment with them in the zeitgeist of step tracking and activity, and then heart rate, and then, sleep, recovery, the extent to which glucose, even now moving into like more of a mainstream, the extent to which the tailwind from quote unquote gut health, being able to put quantifiable anything behind that is so lacking, which on one hand creates this scenario where everything is gut health. Any drink, any supplement, any powder, anything. And then on the other hand, it's once we do have a metric or a device or what have you to actually validate or refute what is or isn't gut health, like that as like an accelerant, I think will be interesting to watch unfold.
Totally. I mean, the reality is like sleep supplements, you can test now, right? Like,
Yeah.
does magnesium before bed actually help me sleep? Like, I don't know. Let's find out. But like, do my probiotics actually help? Like, that's kind of where the state of the art is right now. It's finger in the air, we're guessing. And so I think it's because I mean, like we were just talking about, there's these devices that now enable you to run these experiments on yourself and test these things and optimize your own health in every other area. Now it's like, okay, what's the last frontier?
Now, very much, we talked about raising the funding and having the right basically to get to January and get a product out there, and a lot of heads down work, I'm sure, just making sure that, everything is tracking. What are you and the team, I'm sure on a daily, hourly basis, but if you look between now and then, like, what are you guys talking about? What are the KPIs? What are the things that you're trying to convey to them with like, hey, this is where we need to be. This is what's most important. And basically, how are you keeping all those things tracking to that date? Like there's a lot to do. And I'm sure,
Pen and paper.
exactly.
Yeah, I have a pen and paper checklist that I every morning I come in and I write down like, all right, here's the different projects we have in flight, and right now I can count 17 of them. There's just so and like I don't have to touch every single one of those projects every single day, but like probably every other week we go through touches of every single person involved in all those projects. And it's things from getting our third party logistics in order. We're working with our manufacturer to get through what's called the new product introduction process. There's these big milestones, electronics validation testing, and then design validation testing, and then product validation testing. And one of my co-founders just flew out to Taiwan. He'll be flying back out to Thailand next month to work with our manufacturer, shoulder to shoulder. And then we're doing a bunch of validation testing. So we're hiring gastroenterologists to come in and label hundreds of poop pictures each so that we can compare how does our model perform against GIs, and then more importantly, how do GIs compare against each other modeling the same set of 300 images. There's no ground truth, right? It's all subjective. And so how does our model perform against the median gastroenterologist agreement amongst other gastroenterologists is really the thing we're trying to test against. We're talking to clinical partners who are interested in doing research with us. We're talking to retailers who have reached out to us and like asking to carry us in their stores. Like, and for the most part, those conversations are like, we're not there yet. And then obviously there's all the product work and the design work and just making sure that this product is as thoughtful as it can be, because this is something I'm a deep believer in, is that people can feel when something was made with careful attention and care, and that you made the decisions to go the extra mile instead of cut corners. Whereas like when you order a knockoff product on Temu, you can feel that like this was a money grab. And like this is very much my life's mission, and I think most of our team would say the same.
I think it's clear to anyone who will listen to this, just given your passion and excitement. And I think you said maybe a handful of times, this is your life's work, that, what you're pouring into it will deliver that high kind of bar that, yes, people expect, but again, very clear that you've set for yourself in doing this. You mentioned in the interim, like folks following along and learning more and you getting to talk about it. And for those people, what's the best place to do that? Website, social, anything else that we should look out for, or that you want to share with folks?
Yeah, so our website is thronescience.com. Our handles are just Throne Science on Twitter and Instagram. And then I'm personally at Scott Hickle. I do a lot of building in public. I tweet about this chronically online. And so if you want to see a lot of bit of the behind the scenes, that's where you would go. And then I would also encourage you, drop your email on our homepage at thronescience.com. And that's the best way to find out, when we launch and we're doing those kind of launch promotions.
Perfect. We will get everything linked up in the show notes. Make sure it's easy to find. And yeah, super stoked that we got to chat today. We'll be following along as you get to launch and beyond. So excited, that you were able to make some time.
Joe, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.